DM, can I make an insight check? Oh, okay. Truth be told, I actually prefer, when I'm running a game, I prefer the players don't just like come right out with that and straight ask for a roll. I like them to be a little more creative. However, I just want to get on to this today for the vlog. I got two tips, one for players, one for DMs, that revolve around the insight check, okay? Let's get right into it. First, for players, if you're a player, I want to say you should be asking for insight checks pretty regularly, in my opinion. However, I recommend that you don't just outright say, "Can I make an insight check?" I feel like that's kind of like first level D&D. And if you're brand new to the game, of course, that's the right thing to do. Once you've sort of graduated and you've played a few sessions, you have some sense of how the game works, I recommend in character you ask questions like, do I trust this person? Do I think this person's telling the truth? How do I feel about this situation? Am I getting any kind of spider sense about this? Things like that. Anything that will suggest to your DM that you're trying to check in on your character's gut feelings in the moment. And this, it says insight, but maybe intuition might have been a nicer way or another way to call this skill. So I try to think of it myself as insight / intuition. So that's for the players. I think you want to use this frequently and check in with your DM. If your DM doesn't get it and is not then saying, okay, well, hey, why don't you go ahead and make an insight check and let's find out, or just straight up answering you, no, you think this person is telling the truth, they seem to be completely honest and forthright, they're a city guard, and they don't seem to be an underhanded kind of city, then, go with what your DM says. But if you get that feeling like, oh, maybe they're not realizing I'm trying to ask for an insight check, by all means, then at that point, you can ask for an insight check. Of course, my players, I'm fine if they do that. I sort of have asked them to, first try the in-character way of asking, and then if I'm not getting the hint, that beat me over the head. So, like slap me in the face, like, hey, dude, I want to make an insight check. Okay, so now for DMs, if you're running the game, of course, pay attention for those cues, right? That if your players are asking you, hey, do I trust this person? Or, hey, what do I think about this person? Or, am I getting any weird feelings or vibes about this person? They're basically asking you to make an insight check. And you can, by all means, just ask for their passive insight. That sometimes is perfectly appropriate. The tip I want to share with you that I try to use is this. Every once in a while, I try to think to myself, is there any reason that one of the party members might be getting an intuition about the situation? And then, in those cases, I'll ask them to make a roll, and depending on the roll, I will always give them something. One thing I don't like to do as a DM, D&D tends to be sort of pass-fail. That's sort of written into the mechanics of the game, and on a certain level, that's fine. For instance, in combat. However, I like to flavor things. In such a way that every roll feels like a success. So that's not entirely the case, and always there is going to be failure. I always think, especially with roles like insights and investigations, it's fine to give the players less than what they were hoping for. You're still giving them something, but maybe it's not what they really wanted, and that's okay. So with insight checks, ask them to make an insight check, and then maybe you just tell them things about how what the character is picking up on. Maybe you tell them, maybe it's nothing more than just like, you're getting goosebumps. What does that mean? That's kind of interesting and creepy and bizarre, and all that might do, hopefully, is get your players to maybe start looking at the bigger picture and thinking about what's going on around them. And that's my trick for DMs, is to use the insight check as a way to maybe drop little hints and drop little gems of intuition and insight that the characters might have. Specifically, like, for instance, if a thief, a rogue, is making, like, they say, I want to inspect this lock, have them do both. Have them make an insight check and an investigation check. The investigation check is going to tell them if it's trapped, right? But the insight check might tell them something about what kind of person chooses this specific kind of lock. And you can do this with every class, with everything. If it's an arcana check, if it's a wizard that is in another laboratory, or if it's a sorcerer who senses some weird kind of like ley line of magic, or some surge of magic or something like that. There's a million ways you can do this. So insight checks are a really cool mechanic in 5e. I encourage you to use them all the time. If you have some thoughts about that, let me know. In the meantime, check out one of these videos, and I'll see you tomorrow. Keep rolling 20s until then, and remember, it's your game. Play your way.